Hi and welcome back to another video. A few weeks ago somebody posted on my Discord server an offer from AliExpress about this Samsung 980 EVO with 4TB for €40, which seemed an offer too good to be true, especially thinking about that a 980 EVO doesn't even exist. And that's when I thought, okay, maybe we should buy this instead of him and find out what this is about. And then I came across a few more stuff like this 128TB external SSD. So I bought all of them. We're going to investigate them. That should be quite fun. Today's video is powered by Hetzner with the AX52 dedicated root server. With the powerful Ryzen 7700 8-core CPU and 64GB DDR4 memory in the base config, the AX52 is the perfect all-rounder. Two quick 1TB Gen 4 NVMe SSDs are available to rapidly access your data. If you wish, you can also extend this further, for example with two additional 2TB NVMe SSDs or two 16TB HDDs. Depending on your requirements, you can select either Germany or Finland as location of your new dedicated root server. Find out more in the link below. As I already said, 980 EVO doesn't even exist, which is quite interesting. And then we have a 990 Pro, which theoretically does exist as a SKU, but not with 4TB, at least not yet. Samsung announced this, that it's going to come, but at least right now it's not available yet. So that's already something that sounds quite fishy, especially if you think about that this is €40, this is €50, that's already quite... something might be wrong here. But then I came across those external SSDs. This one states that it comes with 64TB of capacity, and then we have this one with 128GB capacity. If you think about it, the biggest SSDs you can easily buy end somewhere at around 30TB. And they're already quite expensive. At least I would say 2,000 to 3,000 euro for one of those with 30TB capacity. I know that there are 64TB capacity SSDs, but they are very hard to get if they are available, and they are definitely in the high 4-digit amount of price, maybe like 8 to 10,000 euros, something in that direction. So getting this for €30 seems to be quite odd. We will start with the external drive that states 64TB, and already on the packaging everything is like kind of odd. It says gold. Then, I mean, it was probably not made for being shipped with the gold one, otherwise they would probably check the color. It says hard drive enclosure, and if we turn it around, the product interface states USB 3.0 micro B, then USB 3.1 Type-C Gen 1, and then on the bottom it says supports hard disk M.2. Well, not even M.2, it says M2, then NGFF, which is next generation form factor. So what is it? Is it a hard drive? Is it something for M.2 SSDs? And what kind of interface is it? Because I don't know. So indeed it's USB-C and not the micro B, but it's also very light. Let's plug it in and see. So let's check what we can actually see in Windows once this SSD is attached. So it shows up as SSD with 61TB of 61TB available. I can also access the device. So that first look all looks fine to me. If we check the properties of the SSD, it shows that the file system is exFAT, which is not usual for an SSD, at least as far as I know. I also tried to read out this SSD with Crystal Disk Info, but as you can see, only my main SSD, which is a real 980 Pro, 2TB, shows up, but even with like extended detection, I cannot see the SSD in here. In Device Manager at least, it pops up as SDK SSD USB device. But let's check with Crystal Diskmark what kind of performance we can see. You can see it's listed as device number D. And I think with Crystal Diskmark and whatever performance we can see might be an indicator what's actually inside this SSD. It already takes forever to create the test file, I think already like 3 minutes, which is definitely unusual. So sequential read, it's not even 16 MB per second, and write, it's 8 MB per second. Already that is an indicator that, I mean, this cannot be a real SSD. Something has to be wrong here. I'm going to use the H2 test W software set to the correct device, so that's D. And I'm now going to write and verify and see what kind of space we actually have instead of the 64TB, which is written here. But Let's see, write and verify might take a very long time. Well, I think this reads that it will take 1,600 hours of testing, which kind of makes sense because it will try to write all the 64 terabyte with 11.8 megabyte per second. Let's see, I will probably just leave the system running overnight. 1 hour of testing passed and we are at about 66 gigabyte. And as you can see, the time remaining is about 1000 hours. But I have hope that I don't have to wait as long. Let's see how big this actually is. After over 2 hours in test and 150 gigabyte of test, I also spent a bit more time researching online. And it seems like the better approach is to set a specific target test size. You can set only, let's say, 128 gigabyte in this case, because that's maybe a more plausible size. So I will set like 130 gigabyte and then test again, because after you increase that specific size, it will be verified. And then we should find out if it's legit or not. All right, I also just noticed that the 150 gigabyte, which I did test with writing, I can now also verify. So I will just wait for this time and let's see what happens. Now we are getting there, another hour, and you can see that it said after 58 gigabyte okay, and after that 5.2 gigabyte data lost. So essentially this SSD has a real capacity of 64 gigabyte instead of 64 terabyte. Kind of as expected, we don't have real 64 terabyte of capacity, we have 1,000th of it, so it's only 64 gigabyte. And yeah, if you research this online, you quickly find this kind of SD card scam. Not quite sure how it works, but it seems like there is a 64 gigabyte SD card inside and some controller that may make this drive appear as a 64 terabyte capacity. So I have a quite bad feeling about this one. Okay, the backup plus slim. 128 terabyte again, advertised size, USB 3.0, it's stated on the drive. If we turn it to the side, it says connect with computers, obviously. If we turn it to the other side, you can see the small asterisk and it says internet connection required, which is for this on the back. If you want to back up your computer with included software, and surprise, there is no software included, you need internet, and if you want to use it between Windows and Mac, you also need internet. This all just doesn't make any kind of sense. Opening the box, I just noticed that it says 3 years limited warranty and then it's linking to Seagate. I'm not quite sure which, shack in China made these, but I'm pretty sure it was not Seagate. Pretty sure the only positive thing about this is the nice brushed aluminum case. Doesn't look bad at all, I have to admit that. Still, it's extremely light. Says USB 3.0 and then we have the micro B connector. Let's just plug it in. The 128 terabyte SSD is surprisingly detected as an HDD, which I find kind of funny. And it's probably exactly the same, just with twice as fake, I'm not sure. If I go to properties, it's also detected with exFAT file system. It's again not detected by Crystal Disk Info, as you can see. And let's just check the speed. So that was great. I selected 512 instead of 1 gigabyte because I thought it might just be quicker to create the test file. And then while it was doing the sequential read, there appeared a message that there is a problem with this USB device. And you can see it just disappeared. So I couldn't even finish any kind of read or write test. That's great. With this SSD, we're going to try ExoFlash test, which apparently helps to restore it to the actual file size. And for that, we just go to restore factory size. Oops. Not sure if that's a good thing or not. Probably not. So as you can see, it's again gone from my system. And I mean, this device is so unstable that I cannot do any kind of test, nothing. I think it's time to go over to the interesting part, opening these up to check what's inside. I already took a small screwdriver to try to open this because there are like no visible screws. Because I'm quite confident that the seller or maker of these tries everything to hide what's inside. We start with the big one. I think I will just saw all the way down here on the back. Should be the best way to do it, especially on the big one, because it's so light, I don't think there's a lot inside. I'm trying to get you some light inside, but you can probably see it a little bit. It's a big case and there is a tiny PCB in the center. That is pretty much what we expected. It's neither an HDD nor an SSD, it's just basically a USB to micro SD adapter with one SD card inside. Everything is glued. You can see even the SD card is glued into the adapter. Yeah, that was kind of as expected. So let's move over to the small one and see if we just find exactly the same thing inside. Surprisingly, the PCB actually in the small one is bigger than in the big one. So it's not exactly the same PCB. It's probably exactly the same type of scam. On the big case, we had the possibility to have 2 of those micro SDs in there, and here's only 1. But yeah, it's just the same kind of scam. We will now remove these PCBs and then go back to my studio and take a closer look. Here we have both PCBs, and they are so similar that you can be certain that both come from the same kind of scam company. They're both labeled in the same way. This one says CA816, this one CA828. So yeah, it's the same kind of marking, same style, same type of PCB. Also, if you pay attention to the controller, you might be able to see that somebody removed the marking on both of these microcontrollers to make sure that you cannot track back easily what kind of IC is actually on there. So somebody is trying to hide their scam. Same goes for the SD card. On the front there is no marking. On the back side there is a marking you could Google. And if you try to Google, you cannot really find anything useful, but you will get directed to the SanDisk website with the topic of SD card scams. So yeah, it's probably also a counterfeit SD card. But what I want to find out now is what happens if we plug this specific SD card just in a normal SD card reader, what kind of capacity we will see without this additional controller. Immediately after plugging it in, it tells me that I have to format the drive. If I go to the drive monitoring of Windows, it tells me that it's a normal 64 GB device, SD card, whatever, with raw file system. So I have to format it first. And formatting the device also worked. I just changed to NTFS. I performed another performance test run with this micro SD card just connected to the system, which showed about 20 megabyte per second in read and about 10 in write. And if you think about this, a 64 gigabyte capacity SD card with this kind of speed will cost in the mass market something between $1 and $2. And then if you think about that this PCB with these like tiny amount of components on it is probably also another $1, and then you have the casing and some packaging, so it ends up probably somewhere between $3 and $4 for this entire product, and they're selling it for $40. So that is a huge margin for just a huge scam, and that's what it is in the end. It's just a pure scam. A typical thing that happens with China and AliExpress. It is the way it is, but if things appear to be good to be true, they usually are, especially with SSDs, memory, and also CPUs. But let's continue with M.2 SSDs. This package has so many weird and obscure things on it. So starting off with the 980 EVO, which doesn't even exist from Samsung. It doesn't read Samsung as a logo itself, but we can see Samsung on this controller on here. It states 4 terabyte of capacity, and also that the read speed is 560 megabyte per second and the write speed is 530 megabyte per second. But if we turn it around, it says 980 EVO SSD, M.2 NGFF, which is new generation form factor, something that was used for advertising back in the days. The definitive SSD for every need. That's actually the slogan of an 870 EVO, so a completely different SSD. But if you check the backside, it's stating a lot of Samsung stuff. So for more details, warranty, product information, visit samsung.com. Also Samsung Electronics Limited. So yeah, they're basically pretending to be Samsung. And what's kind of funny is that if you pay attention to the slot right here, that is indicating an M.2 NVMe SSD. But the speed of 560 megabyte per second read and 530 write just indicates that this should be a SATA drive. And out of the box, that is pretty much what we expected. We have a different connector, which is indicating that it's a SATA SSD and not an NVMe SSD. And also there is nothing Samsung on there. It's just delay electronics limited something. So something Chinese for sure. It's also stating VNAND, which I don't think, and also not sure about a 4 terabyte capacity. Also, if you want to try out, if you want to go to this link, it will end up nowhere. But let's peel off the sticker and take a look underneath. Very similar again to our SD card scam. The vendor is trying to hide something because they laser etched away the markings on the controller. Also, if you check out the flash chips, there is a logo on there which kind of reminds me of some Micron stuff. Then I went to Micron and checked for the code that's on there. Couldn't find anything. So I literally have no information what we have here. So I think we just add it to the system and let's take a look. The test setup I'm running currently is a B650E Aorus Master, which does not support SATA M2 SSDs. That's why I'm trying to use this external connection adapter, which I often use for like fetching some data quickly if I forgot about it from an M.2 device. And I think this should work with SATA devices. So it has current, and we can also see an LED on the SSD. At least this one straight shows up with 4 terabyte capacity, also with crystal disk info. First look, seems kind of fine. Was powered on twice and also reads out 4 terabyte of size. My original plan was to also verify the capacity with H2TestW, but as you can see, after 100 gigabyte of test capacity, the write rate dropped drastically to about 37 megabyte per second. And I'm just only verifying the first terabyte right now, which would take about another 7 hours. And then I would have to verify everything. So to verify all of the 4 terabytes, to first write and then verify, would take approximately 24 hours, which I'm not willing to spend on this drive right now. This thing is extremely painful and slow, because I just performed a sequential read and write test. We had about, I think, 36 megabyte per second in read and 0.8 megabyte per second in write. That is a new negative record, I think. So this is kind of like an extremely slow and expensive USB stick, kind of, because it's kind of even worse than that. Absolutely not recommended to buy any of this. But what about the 990 Pro? The 990 Pro? Because just judging by the key, this should be an NVMe SSD. The packaging looks identical to the other one, with a few exceptions. It says 3500 megabyte per second read on the bottom, and it's listing NVMe SSD 4 terabyte, but it's the same type of packaging. It's for sure the same kind of scam vendor. Again, if you turn it around, it's listing some Samsung stuff, which is definitely not going to be the case, but it comes with 5 years warranty instead of 3. So maybe that's better. Looking at this, it looks a bit better though, just by the first look, because we have a bit more ICs in there. So yeah, not quite sure about this one, but let's peel off the sticker. Same thing again, somebody tried to etch away the markings on this control IC for whatever reason, but we have more flash storage. Again though, we don't find any kind of cache, so that's an indication that for sure read and write rates will drop drastically. The first look in crystal disk info is already great. My real Samsung 980 Pro looks good. If I switch over to this one, it says 100% bad. Yeah, that's already promising. Even though it says 100% bad, sequential read, I mean, it's about 1000 megabyte below the advertised speed. Still, 2500 megabyte per second seems like a usable size. Just waiting for the write speed. Even sequential write doesn't look that bad, at least with the very quick load. We have about 1000 megabyte per second. I'm now testing again on real capacity with H2TestW, and as you can see, with about 41 seconds elapsed time, we are still writing with about 1 gigabyte per second. But I'm expecting this to drop quite drastically due to the missing cache, which we can see already right now. So I'm not quite sure what will happen time-wise, but let's check back maybe in like 2 or 3 minutes. After almost 10 minutes, it dropped quite heavily. It's at 180 megabyte per second right now. It's still dropping slowly, but it's still dropping. With this speed, I could still finish this test in about 3 hours. Then I would still have to verify it. Let's see how this turns out after maybe an hour. After 3 hours of writing to the drive and only achieving a 240 GB, we have a remaining time of almost 1 full day. And that's only for the writing part. We would still have to verify all of this data. So just the test itself would take almost 2 days, which I'm not willing to spend. And it shows what kind of garbage this drive is. In the end, the result was kind of obvious, and especially looking at something like this, the 128 terabyte external SSD, which is even called Backup Plus. If you're thinking to get one of these drives, especially for backups, that is a very stupid idea, because you're going to ruin your data guaranteed. That's something you should not use ever for any kind of storage. And the same goes to those M2 SSDs. And I mean, the fun part is that this one, that's a SATA drive. If I went to the online offer at AliExpress, it didn't even state that it's a SATA drive. It was listed as 2023 Samsung latest gen M.2 4 terabyte SSD for €40, which obviously it's not gonna make sense, because €40 or $40 for 4 terabyte, it's not gonna work out. No matter how you're going to try it, this capacity of memory is just not available for this price, and it will for a long time not be. And it's simple as that. If you're looking online for storage and you see something that's I don't know, a third of the price, it's probably not legit, and it's actually what you have here. And even the NVMe SSD that kind of looked a little bit better, you still have to keep in mind that even though it's performed quite okay, first look in Crystal Disk Info, this thing is not going to contain 4 terabyte. I think it's best case a 1 terabyte SSD. And I mean, if they fake the capacity, then you don't know what else is fake and how reliable is it going to be. You saw that the read and write speeds, they just drastically stop working after the tiniest amount of load, because it also doesn't contain any kind of DRAM cache. So just stay away from any kind of drives like this. I mean, data in the end is just very valuable, especially to you as a consumer. If you have your personal data on there and it's getting lost, it was probably not worth saving money on this. That was a bit of a different video, because right now, at least it feels to me like in our scene, there is not much interesting stuff going on. It's also summer and it's very hot in here. And so I just felt like doing a different video than usual. I hope you also enjoyed this. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. See you soon. Bye bye.